Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill, and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to My World with Jeff Jarrett. And of course, we couldn't do it without the Hall of Famer himself, your friend and mine, Double J, Jeff Jarrett. Jeff, how are you, man?
Conrad, how we doing today? Another episode of My World, but I just got a funny feeling this isn't just another episode of My World. I don't think any of them are just another episode, but this is our first ever, I guess, shall we say, like I said last week, it's an episode dedicated to a single person, a talent. It's not an event. It's not me pulling out guns and holding Vince McMahon up, or me laying down in the ring because I was tired and didn't want to work with Hulk that night, or any of that kind of stuff. No, today's episode is unique. It's a first for us, not for you. But I'm looking forward to it. It literally spans 30 years. So I get lots of tweets. Hey, man, when are you going to talk about Memphis or USWA or Dallas or any of that? So today we're going to check all the boxes. Memphis, Dallas, Tennessee, WWF, little WCW, because we'll have to go there. But yeah, a lot of ground we're going to cover. A Thunderdome, potatoes, all kinds of stuff.
Well, Stone Cold Steve Austin is our topic today. And of course, we're just calling the name of the show Austin 316. If I had to guess, your relationship with Steve Austin begins with his training in Texas with Chris Adams. Is that correct?
That is. And before we get going, I'm sure, and this is, as they say in Mick Foley world, this is the cheap plug, the cheap pop. You've done single episodes with Bruce and JR, I'm sure, and Eric and others on Steve, correct?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I thought. Yeah. Many.
But we're not really talking about Steve's career here today. We're talking about you and y'all's relationship.
Yeah, I get that. But I just, again, go to the archives. You can go on YouTube. You can go to ad free. You can go to anywhere you download a podcast and get all kinds of context. But yes, the first time I laid eyes on, at that time known as Steve Williams, was in Dallas, Texas. What was that address? Industrial Boulevard at the Sportatorium. But I was, were you ever in that building, Conrad?
Nope. Never got to see it. Would have loved to.
Oh, it's a great, I'll call it almost in the round theater seating, but the ring sunk down, the ring was, when you walked in, you went down steps. So when you walked in, you literally walked in on the back row. But up at the top, they had this little area called the Crow's Nest, where back in those days, heels and baby faces could watch matches together, but you could peek down, and it was right off of Fritz's old office. And then everybody who sort of followed in Fritz's footsteps, Eric Embry, my dad, obviously all the other Texas executives, but you could look down and watch the matches. Well, we were out there during this time, and, a lot of times I would stay Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But Chris Adams, man, this is to sort of set it up. Chris megastar during the heyday of WCCW. And, this is late 80s. So the territories weren't doing so well. So Chris decided to start a wrestling school. And him and my dad went in partners on the wrestling school, but obviously Chris ran it, but, just used the facilities of the sportatorium, and we advertised to him. So they were partners in it. And, his class, first class, had that. And my dad said, hey, let's go watch some of Chris's students. And we sat up in the crow's nest and watched Chris go through the training sessions. And that's the first time I ever saw Steve.
And what did you think of him as an in-ring performer?
He had several guys in there that were good. And I just, so I'm still only 3 years in the business at this time, around that, as far as actively being the business, 2 or 3 years. But I had known of Chris and, his angle, with Gino, and just Chris was a big star out there. And I always liked his matches and all that. And then here I am seeing Chris teach these students. It was really interesting. But Steve was the standout. Stone Cold had, I'll call it ring presence. I didn't probably call that at the time, but I'll call it that now. He had ring presence from day one. And Chris was high on him in a lot of ways. My dad, was definitely high on him. He was the standout of the class.
You could tell there was something there, though, right away.
Oh, sure. He had just the blonde hair and a swagger about him. Steve's natural gait or walk has some Texan swagger to it. And he had that literally from the beginning. And like I said, Chris Adams was very high on him. And so, as we get into it, and I'll follow your lead here. I just thought of something. We didn't talk about feedback. We got right into the meat and potatoes today, didn't we, Conrad?
We did, man. I feel like you're going to go long in the tooth on this one. Could be wrong.
I'll watch his on, folks. I think I'm already getting chastised subliminally because I went too long last week.
No.
That's another story. But no, Chris was very high on him. And so much so, obviously not just our territory, but every territory remaining, you wanted new, fresh talent. And Chris Adams and my dad picked Steve to be the first one on TV.
So let's talk about, and I know we're going to talk about it another time, but what are you specifically doing in Texas at the time?
So we went out there, gosh, and you're right. This is a whole nother podcast, but they were down and out. When I say they, the Von Erichs, Kevin and Karen.
And who is we? You said they and we. So define those.
Sorry, pronouns. You just chastising right out of the gate. No. So my father was invited out to sort of take a look at their business. And the Von Erichs were 40 or 50 grand in debt to Channel 11, and Channel 11 in Dallas, Texas is a mega station. And that was basically, their bread and butter as far as drawing fans and making, the spot shows run, and it had a strong signal. So long story short, my dad ended up taking 60%. Kevin had 20, Carrie had 20. And so, the mode of operation, we taped the ESPN tapings on Friday night, and Saturday morning we did the Channel 11 taping. And Channel 11 taping were, I don't want to say it was like Memphis studio wrestling, but that's what it was as far as creative storylines. That was building the houses. And we would, basically on Saturday morning, we would talk about what's going to happen this Friday night to get them out. So that was sort of we taped on Saturday morning, free to the people. It packed. We opened up concession stands and parking, and man, we really got that thing rocking and rolling. But that was sort of the business model. Saturday morning free, pay on Friday nights. And so my dad could not be everywhere at once. And obviously we had Tennessee running back here, and Lawler was booking that and all that. So I was, for lack of a better word, my dad's right-hand man. Eric Embry was booking, but I was out and I enjoyed it. I was working just about every show we ran, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Sunday until we started the bus trips, which we got it. We'll get into that. But no, so we is, I guess you could say, me and my father. And they is from a management, Frank Dusick was there. Branko Lubitsch was the rep. He was office. My older brother, Jerry, that's the one and only time he, I guess you could say, put his toe in the business. He moved out to Dallas and ran the box office, watching the money on show days. So family business again. And yeah, that's we and they. I hope I answered those questions. But Kevin and Carrie were the principals of the Von Erich, and they were the owners.
So when you're out there, you're doing a little bit of everything as part of your dad's, quote unquote office, but you're doing in-ring wrestling as well. Did you ever get in the ring and roll around or work with Steve at any point?
No, that was the school. And again, so this is 88. And we started which is another podcast. We'll get into the Texas and Tennessee, the last big Cotton Bowl show where I wrestled Eric, which sort of led into Super Clash. But no, I was working 7-8 times a week. And that's something that, I wish guys today would get that opportunity. But, getting to work in weekly towns, Memphis every Monday, it's different than working in 20 different towns in 30 days. We were in the episodic storytelling in Tennessee, and then out in Texas, we did the Friday night, we'll call it live event, and Saturday morning TV. And then we ran spot shows all around like that. So I didn't get in the wrestling school. I wasn't a part of it. I witnessed it maybe a grand total of 5, 6, 7 times, something like that. I forget what night they had it on or what afternoon, but anyway, I would, observe it, but that was about it.
Let's mention Steve wrote in his book. So I was getting paychecks from Jerry Jarrett, but I wasn't getting them as often as I would have liked. But I thought I was doing a good job in the ring, and finally asked Jerry when he was going to book me full time. Jerry said, quote, "Hell, Steve, I think you're ready now." You were seeing some of what Chris was doing. Did you agree with your dad that Steve was ready?
So put it in context. The short answer is absolutely. But you got to remember in Memphis or wherever, being ready is relative. But Steve stood out so much in his wrestling school class that absolutely he was ready. And I vividly remember Chris sort of laying out the storyline that he wanted to propose to do, because it was just so unique that, hey, here's a student. And I was just enthralled by it. He wanted to bring in the mentor, mentee, whatever you want to call it, the Bruno Zabisco storyline. But it was just really cool that, okay, we're going to head down this road. And then where it led was, it was, you talk about blurring the lines and so relatable with wives and ex-wives and Tony Adams and Gene Clark, and, Steve and Gene ended up getting married, but just the genesis of all that and how it was working. And so, yeah, Steve obviously was, I'm assuming he put it in his book, but he was married and he was working on a loading dock, and he loved this business and wanted to get into it and had a passion like so many other of us young guys that, man, let's do something fun. Let's do something that energizes me. I don't want to punch a time clock, period.
So he starts working full time for the first time in his career in Memphis for your dad. He's working as Steve Williams. And at this point, before Dutch Mantell renames him Steve Austin, that's a story that everybody knows, but he's still Steve Williams at first. Dutch renames him. Our boy Bruce tells a story on Woo Nation, my very first podcast with the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And
so like, Bruce was the guest.
Yes,
I got you. I just making sure that I understood this.
And as the legend goes, Steve had worked a long time, very hard, to try to figure out how to just make a living out of this thing. At times, he couldn't afford to get a hotel room. He's sleeping in his car. Other times he's just living on cans of tuna and raw potatoes, and he's behind on rent, probably going to get evicted, but really believes there's something to this. And he's just tickled that now he's got the opportunity to work 7 days in a week. Instead of getting booked here or there and not being able to eke out a living, this could finally be the big break. He got it. He's a full-time wrestler. And he gets his first check. He's all excited. I'm finally going to get to eat something besides cans of tuna and raw potatoes. I'm not going to be able to or be forced to sleep in my own car. I'm going to be able to make rent. I'm going to do it, man. This is it. He tears that envelope open and he's shocked at what he sees. And he just stares at it. And you can almost hear an exhale. The disappointment is just written all over his face. And around that time, the promoter's son, who quote unquote grew up in a 20,000 square foot house, comes strutting by.
Should I be humming Simply Irresistible right now?
Slaps him on the back and says, "Keep on staring at it, boy. It ain't going to make it no bigger." That's the way Bruce has heard it. I've heard other people say the words were a little different, but the gist is the same. Stare at it all you want. It won't get any bigger. Ha ha ha. Slap him on the back. Now, the context of that is important because everyone sees you as the promoter's boy, AKA he didn't earn nothing. He was born on third. He's spoiled. Look at the quote unquote, the guy who's screwing me. This is his son. And he's going to wake up tomorrow in this mega mansion and just get to run roughshod around here and do whatever he wants. That's the perception. Now, is that reality? Probably not. We've talked about that before. As soon as you started wrestling, you had to find your own place, et cetera, et cetera. But I also want to add the context of you're very, very young. How old would you guess you were there?
21, 22.
And a lot of people listening to this are my age. They're 40 years old. And we think we got life figured out now, but boy, we knew we had life figured out when we were 21.
Yeah. And Steve's a few years older than me.
And so now there's this younger kid coming behind you, slapping you on the back after you've been chasing your dream, sleeping in your damn car, probably got a crick in your neck, probably hungry as hell, literally. And it happens. And supposedly that's a story that, now let's add the context here. Was Bruce in Memphis? No. Was Bruce in Texas? No. Was Bruce in the same state that show happened in that day where Steve's in the backstage area and opens that envelope? No. So who told him that story? Stone Cold Steve Austin. And of course, he told him that story once he was the biggest star in the business. Let's clear up the rumor and innuendo. Did this happen? Did you make that comment to Steve, slap him on the back? Do you remember this interaction or exchange?
I absolutely, positively, without question, did it. No, of course I do. I remember it vividly. And let's go down the story behind the story because, you know, the name of Dwayne Johnson's production company is called $7. So it's sort of a marker for him. It's cool. But when I hear this story, it always sort of relate it because Steve and Rock are connected creatively through the years. But let's go back in time and look, should I have said it? Hell no, because I had no idea and didn't know till years later until these kind of stories came out from, and I don't even know the first time I remember hearing it, but Bruce and others. And I'm like, oh dear Lord. I was shocked. I was shocked in so many ways because Steve, now Conrad, get ready for this. Steve ain't the only first person that I said that to. Matter of fact, it was, you know, you got to laugh about it. because if you don't, you're going to cry over it. My paychecks, and we'll gotten into this, were exactly what others were. We got $40, and this happened in Evansville, Indiana, and we got paid on crappy houses $40 in Louisville, Evansville, Nashville. My father always tried to pay a little bit better in Memphis because the gross was bigger, and so it was a little bit bigger. But there was a lot of $40 payoffs, a lot. And 7 times 40 is $280. So most guys got about $350 a week on the really crappy weeks. Dutch Mantell is legendary at telling these stories. But to put it in complete context, and not to get too much in the weeds, but in Texas, my father, as we just stated, yes, they were partners in the wrestling school. And my father, yes, Chris, let's work this angle. And then they began to work that angle. And then it turned into Tony Adams was Chris's wife, and Jean Clark, who later became Steve's second wife. They got together. So it was Chris's current wife and ex-wife and Steve, and they had a whole storyline, all that. And then Steve really began to grow as a performer. And then that's when we started, taking the bus. We would drive out from a spot show on Thursday. But anyway, Steve came to Memphis, and my dad, he loved him. And Tom Pritchard, he put Tom and Steve together. So Tom would help Steve as far as learn how to be a heel. I was a babyface. Me and Steve worked around that, around the loop. Many, I don't know how many matches I had with Steve in Tennessee. A lot. I'd say over 100. That's, but you can get in 5 or 6 in a week. So it doesn't take long to get that with we got into tags, and we'll get into all kind of stuff. And Steve was, on the bus and making the rides. And so were me and Steve best friends? No, but it's like I had been around him at this point a year or two. I don't know exactly, but a long time. And to get into the territory sort of psychology, payday was Wednesdays in Evansville. It's just how it worked. Memphis, Big Show Memphis, everybody was hands on decks. And then on Tuesday is when the bookkeeper would write the checks. And then me or whoever, my grandmother, even if my dad, which my dad rarely went, but somebody would go by the office and pick up the paychecks. It also incentivized guys to make Evansville. It was the worst weekly town by far out of the loop. So that was payday and handing out checks. And Frank Morrell, I rode with him. You know him by another nickname, but Mr. Morrell, no, Frank. We traveled up and down the roads together, and he probably was the first one who would I heard him say that, because guys would come into the territory and the checks would be terrible, but it was what it was. And I can remember Frank getting in the car when we would hear, not Steve, but other guys coming up in the territory bitching about everything. And Frank would look over at me and say, last I remember, nobody told him he had to come. He showed up. It was okay. That was sort of the mentality. And obviously my grandfather, Eddie Marlin, had that mentality. You pay what the house is drawn. It's just a whole different business then. You got paid off the house. Nowadays, that isn't, it just doesn't happen. It's TV deals and merchandise and everything. But back then, you couldn't pay what you didn't have. And my dad had a choice. I can overpay the talent of money that's not in the house, and I go out of business, or do I stay in business and continue to hopefully give guys an opportunity to move on? And that's a business decision he made. He wanted to stay in business. So that happened, Conrad. So the checks were handed out, and I can tell you, I probably said that multiple times to different guys. But that night, Steve, and you have to know Evansville, the heels came down one side of the building, babyface came down the other back, but we all dressed in our dressing room downstairs. And Steve, everybody sort of had their different areas of the dressing room. And Steve had his chair set. It was right where I would, or not just me, others had to go, and we had to go up some steps to get to the stage. And Steve was sitting there, and I walked by him, and he had the check in his hand. And I didn't think two things about it when I said it, but I said it, and it obviously stuck with Steve to this day.
All right, let's run a timeout right now and give you a heads up. Attention, sports bettors. Has anyone ever given you $1,000 before? Well, Jeff, our guest at this time is trying to do just that. Welcome to the program, the king of Vegas sports gambling and America's odds maker. It's Wayne Allen Root. Wayne, how are you?
Hey, Conrad. Hey, Jeff. I'm not trying to give you $1,000 free. I'm giving you $1,000 free at vegaswinners.com. That's my website. And I know so many people in the wrestling world love to bet on football. It's an American pastime. It's now legal in most states, a majority of American states. And guys love to bet on football. But I know people get skeptical and cynical. So even though I'm the best in the world, the media calls me the king of Vegas sports gambling, even though I've assembled the best team ever, 21 great sports handicappers at vegaswinners.com, and you have 21 heroes to choose from.
Yeah, it seems like you've got it all over at vegaswinners.com. You've got free picks, you've got the best bets, and you're doing it every single day, not just yourself, but 21 champion sports betting experts. Dude, this feels like a deal that's too good to be true. It's fully automated. It's completely private. You'll never even speak to anyone. So go check it out. Get $1,000. Are you listening to that? It's vegaswinners.com. Just log on to vegaswinners.com. That's vegaswinners.com. Site. Do you recognize that it was kind of a shitty thing to say?
Kinda. It's horrible. I mean, it was, look, do I have regrets across the board? Oh my God. I mean, of course I do in many, many ways. But did I say that of malice or spite or gotcha? The thing was, and this is what others knew because they saw it was what it was. You went into it. My dad threw me out of the house when I started working because I came in late seeing my girlfriend. My checks, my dad didn't do it because he wanted to prove to Lawler or anybody else. My dad wanted to discipline me. So he made sure that I got paid what my opponent got paid. That was just that was his rule. Don't pay Jeff a penny more than you pay his opponent. And that was the deal. But yes, I regret saying it. And a lot of other crap back in that day.
It's interesting to go back and relive some of this stuff and see how it all got tangled up. But, we're going to get there. But would you agree that that's probably the first part of the web that we're about to weave here of why Austin had hard feelings on your side?
I can tell you this, and I've said this multiple times on this podcast. Communication is the key to every relationship. I don't care if it's your spouse or a stranger on the side of the road or the homeless guy begging for money and whatever. Everybody has a story behind the story, and the compassion and the understanding that you get with age and wisdom is radical. And so I had residual heat, as a lot of folks like to say, but my father pissed a lot of people off being promoter, not on purpose. It just was what it was. Maybe he did sometimes on purpose, but yes, this incident, had I known, I would have immediately rectified. And here's how a cocky 21-year-old would have rectified it. Hey, Steve, dude, come here. Look at my effing check. Do you really think I meant that? F no. I mean, I'm getting paid exactly what you're getting paid. But guess what I'm doing? I'm getting out there, shaking hands and kissing babies and getting picture money. But I can tell you, Conrad, it is for sure hindsight's 2020, but this definitely started. And this is what's kind of ironic. Look, Steve could have gotten his car at any time and gone back to Texas. So could Undertaker, so could Soul Taker or Papa Shango, Godfather, so could so many other folks that came through the lean times, Dwayne Johnson being one of them. It's not like they signed any contract for my dad to work in USWA. You could go home at any time. And Dutch and Frank Morrell and any Bill Dundee, they all would gig me about that. Hey man, they can all leave. Those guys decided to stay, but yes, had I known, I would have never said it, but it definitely set the relationship. And again, we had I felt a really good relationship up to this point. I didn't even know it went sideways.
Oh man. So you two wind up working a lot when he's in Memphis, including a couple of matches that Tom Pritchard has watched over at adfreeshows.com. You guys even did a Thunderdome match. Listen to this lineup: Bill Dundee, Danny Davis, Eddie Gilbert, Jeff Jarrett, Robert Fuller. That's one side against Eric Embry, Steve Austin, the Texas Hangman, and Dr. Tom Pritchard. What are your memories of this Thunderdome match?
Texas versus Tennessee. Eric Embry had a knack. I think we talked just last week or on a recent episode about Dutch had a knack of booking Puerto Rico and drawing money. Eric Embry had a knack for Dallas territory. He just did. And so in Texas, it's like a whole other country, much like Mexico or Canada or like Puerto Rico. A lot of national pride, a lot of state pride in Texas. So the old verbiage that if it wouldn't have been for Tennesseans, there would be no Texas. And it's a nerve. It's blurring that. Oh wait, that kind of is true. So in wrestling context, we're going to say he really meant that. All this other stuff's kind of make believe, but oh man, they really mean this, Texas versus Tennessee. But when you just list those names, Fuller and Eddie Gilbert, Dundee, it was, and Eric had laid it out right. And I know Texas Hangman, and there was a lot of ups and downs and weaves and turncoats and all that kind of stuff. But it was a big blow off program.
What do you remember of working with Steve after this? I mean, after your moment in Evansville, was there ever any inclination as you guys were working a series of matches here in all these various towns? I mean, you're seeing each other on a pretty regular basis. Does any
every day? And the things that I, obviously when I, after the fact, but learning through the years, I go back and jar my memory, but I can remember during my WWF time thinking, man, we really got sideways. But I remember just a few years ago. So when Steve came up, when he broke into the business, he didn't call a match. No young guy does. So I'd had 3-4 years in the time of the business. Maybe by the 1990, I had 5 years in the business, whatever. But I can remember me and Steve working together, and there was a gradual process. A lot easier for heels to call the match. It just is easier, but when you have someone green, the babyface has to call it. So anyway, there's a transition period where Steve started calling the match. I enjoyed the hell out of working, and it was, if Steve didn't enjoy working with me as him being the heel and I'm a babyface, he damn sure fooled me, because if you watch my work as a babyface, all I did was sell, drop kicks and sell, drop kicks and sell. So, and could throw a punch. But yeah, we worked an awful lot, but I never knew there was any kind of anger or resentment. None.
Well, he's not long for Memphis before Dusty Rhodes gives him a call to bring him to WCW. We've talked about this before, but it was on one of those bus trips during this Texas era for your dad, where he's doing both stuff with the Von Erichs in Texas and of course running his own territory in Memphis, where you found out that WCW had expressed interest in working with you and he had shut it down, saying you weren't ready. But now you see this guy who literally was training when you first got there. I mean, you're already working matches, you're up and going and established, and he's still training, and now he's getting the call to go to WCW. That had to make you feel a certain type of way now.
Well, as a talent, yes, but I felt for sure he was ready because, as you said last week, I'm a wrestling junkie. Back then as well, I watched all of WCW and WWF, and in those days you had to record it. But let me take a step back further. Scott Steiner came to Tennessee in '87, I think. I think and we hit it off from day one and became best friends, and families, and we go way, way, way back. Scott, Robbie, Rick Steiner, his older brother, it was in the business, but Scott wasn't in Tennessee very long, and he went off to WCW. Undertaker, he went to WCW. We could go down a whole list of folks that, Mick Foley. There's a whole list during this, we'll call it 87 through 91, 92. So about 5 years, because I didn't go to Vince till 93. There are a lot of guys that came through the territory that when they got to Tennessee, they were at one level, And when they left and went to make 150 grand, starting salary at WCW 156, some guys 104, but still that's guaranteed. And then we're in the car driving 4,000 miles a week. So, but I can say each guy that left, I'm like, good for them, man. Good for them. I don't blame them. They're tired of staying in $29 a night hotels and eating potatoes and rice and ramen noodles and driving Ford to a car and, everything that went with it, but always had, now I look at it with enormous gratitude. I always had that sort of checks and balances of a Dutch, of a Bill Dundee, of a Frank Morrell, certainly my dad or Lawler, is that this is how the business works. They came here to get an education. You don't see a guy, hey man, I want to be a doctor. Okay, we're going to start paying you 150 grand. Now go to school. Not for 4 years, but for 8. That isn't how the world works. It just doesn't. So coming to Tennessee, getting paid off the house, was it easy? Was it fun? No, but you take the Tennessee and Texas days out of a lot of guys' careers, and it's just, a different story. I've always believed in the fact cream always rises to the top, no matter what. Mick Foley would have main evented. Steve Austin would have main evented. Undertaker would have main evented if you take Tennessee and Texas out of their careers. But it would have been a different path, and nobody begged or told them they had to stay.
I love you always frame it that way.
What do you mean? What frame it what way?
Well, nobody's telling you got to stay here. Nobody's making you come here. And I understand that. JR often says, hey, why don't you go market that resume outside of these walls and see what your street value is? I get that. But it is interesting when that's your attitude here, right? But I've also heard you on the show say, well, JR was fucking with my money. Like you could see both sides on that argument or conversation, could you not?
It's always leverage negotiation for sure. I definitely, when JR quote unquote effing with my money, I definitely had the option to leave and go home and get in the construction business.
Just saying. You come into this, you have to appreciate you came into your wrestling experience with a greater understanding and knowledge of not only wrestling, but being a business owner, and more importantly, owning a wrestling business. And that most people who get into wrestling, Stone Cold included, I don't think his parents were entrepreneurs. I don't think they owned wrestling businesses. I don't even think they owned businesses. And his wrestling knowledge was largely probably what he saw on TV, what he read in magazines, and what gentleman Chris Adams taught him. Yes. So you entered this relationship with a major leg up just based on knowledge of those three that he would not have been privy to. So I just think that context is king here. And certainly he could have went and did it somewhere else, but what would that have looked like for him?
And I'm going to give you one more piece of that. And this is where everything you just said, without question, absolutely times 10. Another thing that I got blessed with, I mean, it really is. Now I can say that from this point of view is that the education, and Kevin Nash says it so eloquently, the real lab discussions, if you will, if you give a college phrase or seminar, or when you ride up and down the car, when you get done with the show and you're going to be in a car for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, you're going to discuss the industry. And so when I rode with my father or grandfather or Frank Morrell or other guys who had been around a while, I can remember conversations that, Pat Tanaka's father a little bit, but a guy like Billy Travis or Paul Diamond or others that maybe had a couple of years in the business but weren't around. Yes, I definitely was super blessed being in those lab discussions, also known as car rides. That really helped that really helped educate me. And Steve, you know, like you said, Chris Adams, and then Bush Rides, and then whoever he's riding in the car with, but for sure.
So let's continue the story here a little bit. You guys don't really cross paths again until 1995, I think. That's when he's going to debut for the World Wrestling Federation as the ringmaster. When did you, I mean, did you see him before that? I mean, when he leaves and goes to WCW, do you run into him again
Nope,
until you're,
never did. You know, it's just one of those things, never crossed paths. I watched him and Brian, and, you know, his success, I'll just say his success he had, you know, in WCW. I mean, he was obviously worked his way up the card pretty quickly too. He got over, you know, maybe not the main event level, but he got over in a quick amount of time because he knew what he was doing. You know, he absolutely knew what he was doing in the ring, but we had never crossed paths.
how was your interaction with him in the WWF? Is it simple? Hey, Jeff. Hey, Steve.
Yeah. And you know what, when he came in, and this may strike you as odd, I don't know. What'd you think? Let me ask you, put you on the foot. What'd you think of the ringmaster gimmick?
Well, it sucks. Everybody knows it sucks.
See, and here's where I'm going the other way with it. Look, we all know Stone Cold is Stone Cold, but I can see where the powers that be, because Steve had a ring presence, and ironically, if you could just for a minute close your eyes, get in a meditative state, and think if Stone Cold would have delivered promos, and I know he could, in the vein of a cool, calm, collected Jake Roberts, not being a, you know, I'm a snake, but I'm a ringmaster, and never really raised his voice, and go out there and wrestle your ass off and do everything he needed to do. You know, look, did it ever mature into that type of character? No, but I actually really, and maybe I was drinking the Kool-Aid too much, I don't know, but I really, like the ringmaster gimmick coming out of the gate, shaved head. I thought Steve can take this and knock it out of the park. That was my initial thoughts. And to answer your question, yes. Hey, Steve. Hey, Jeff. Blah, blah, blah. You know, no big, you know, it's just nothing out of the ordinary. Normal locker room conversation.
So, you leave the WWF. Of course, we've said that story a million times here. And Steve Austin begins his rise. And the ringmaster is not long for this world. No longer does he have a mouthpiece in Ted DiBiase, or is he the $1 million champion? And slowly but surely, he becomes Stone Cold Steve Austin. And around that same time, we'll call it the fall of 96, you're starting to come into your own on Nitro. Got the association with Ric Flair brushing up against the Horseman, going to be, you know, challenging the Giant at a pay-per-view. So you're in a good spot, and he is too, and you're on separate brands. But then what do you know? Every October, 1 year after that's happening in October of 96, October of 97, it's time to revisit the old contract. And you wind up joining the World Wrestling Federation. And as the story goes, the narrative out there is that Vince Russo was really high on you, and that he had promised you this and he had promised you that in regards to, we're going to have you on top. You're going to be working with Steve. Now, let's remember, October of 97, Stone Cold is not the world champion. October of 97, Stone Cold is nursing a broken neck. He got dropped on his head by Owen Hart at SummerSlam just a couple months prior. He did win the Intercontinental title, but he can no longer defend it. So they've taken it off of him, and they're just letting him stun people and do interviews and build his character. And famously in September, they have the first Raw in Madison Square Garden. Cactus Jack debuts. Vince McMahon catches a stunner. Austin gets arrested. So even though he's not technically the world champion, anybody, and I mean anybody, can see, well, he's the next top guy, but he's not the world champ yet. He's not the tippy top of the card just yet. When you're sort of talking to the other side, you work for WCW, you're winded down, you're having conversations with quote unquote New York. who are those conversations going through? Is it Jim Ross? Is it Bruce Pritchard? Is it Vince McMahon? Or is it what the narrative is? It was Vince Russo.
So before I answer that question, I want to make sure, and if you want to just say no, Jeff, we'll jump to that in a minute. But you covered the WCW time frame, and you mentioned the Horseman storyline, but you left out a little footnote. So I guess, on my 30th birthday, I wrestled Flair in Orlando, Florida on Nitro, which I'll never forget. But during that whole storyline, and I can't do a Kevin Sullivan, the devil impersonation, but Mongo and the Horseman and Deborah. And they wanted to do that storyline. And I never really saw how that fit because Double J is, Deborah was the beauty pageant queen. So she needed, through my eyes, she needed a talent that would be, for lack of a better word, sort of subservient to her, cow down to her, and the Double J Jeff Jarrett was the flashy loudmouth entertainer that I'm going to strut right in front of Ric Flair. So I thought I needed somebody subservient to me, and me and Kevin Sullivan so had those discussions, and he said, brother, we'll make it work because you know how to make it work. And I'm like, okay. But anyway, that story picked up a lot of steam, and I've referenced this on here. Meltzer wrote in one of his newsletters, and this may or may not be fiction, but oh man, Jarrett may be the hottest heel in WCW during this era. So, but the Deborah McMichael component of this story obviously later comes into play in a major way. So I didn't know if this was the appropriate time, Conrad, to throw that in there. But I didn't want to skip over my time in WCW because it for sure relates to this story. So you want to say something, or you may keep going with answer your question?
You can answer my question whenever you get around to it.
You're in a bad mood. Jeez.
How am I in a bad mood?
I can just tell the look on your face.
I said, hey, who called Vince Jr.? And you said, well, not Deborah. And that's what happened.
Okay. So at when contract time was coming up, I signed the 1-year deal. I again, and I've said this, I knew literally Nitro One that this is a different company than I had been accustomed to, that there was no Vince McMahon. There wasn't no, Kevin Sullivan was booking with a committee, but Eric was the boss. But then Eric also had Hulk and Savage, and you could just talk to those guys and knew that they were sort of doing their own thing. And then Hall and Nash were red hot. It was just a different organization. Knew it was run differently, and I knew that that just sort of weaving through everything. I think I'd like to give Vince another shot. And during that time, because business was heating up, and the guaranteed money was flying like crazy, and I, to this day, I've never been a big believer in using agents. But again, me and Vince had our relationship, but I just said, hey man, I'm not going to get an agent, so I'm going to sort of work with my dad. What better guy that can give me context and can give me some good advice and help me through this process? So not that my dad was my agent, but I'll say maybe an advisor, and talked to my attorney in Atlanta. And the first real point of contact was Russo had talked to McMahon. My father had talked to Vince, and then I talked to Vince, and we set up a meeting and flew up to Vince's house. The thing that I had no idea that had changed from 95, 96 in a major way. And, this is something that me and Jim ever get to sit down and really get granular on things, is that's the one thing that I had no idea, that when I left, look, Jim was an employee and an executive, but I had no idea the power that he had gained on putting together his team, his roster, his players, because I still thought it was a Vince McMahon completely run operation. I don't say that, but anyway, so my point was my day-to-day contact, or my point of reference, was Jeff Jarrett needs to talk to Vince McMahon. And that's what was set up, flying to Vince's house, went up to Greenwich, went in, and had the meeting, and Jim was there, and we all talked amongst four of us, and that's how the meeting went down. But that was how, yes, Russo was a part of it, but it was more Jeff and Vince, and Jim Ross was there, Jeff Jarrett was there.
Is there anything said about working with Steve?
None, like zero. It creative wasn't even discussed, so to speak.
All that's discussed is the number of dates and the amount of cash.
Well, just the contract and.
But what's a contract if it's not the number of dates and money? That's it, right? That's a contract for wrestling.
It's just money. It wasn't even dates. I came to work, and I'm sure some guys maybe, not to my knowledge, but it wasn't. I was ready to come back. I guess if you had to sort of subtitle the meeting, it was Double J's ready to come back and get up on this horse again, and not literally, but figuratively speaking. And here's the money, and get off to the races, and let's do this. All positive. We knew it wasn't going to be some long-winded, high-level negotiation, either just by Vince. Unless I really screwed up, it was pretty much a given deal that, okay, I'm coming back to work.
So did you have a relationship with Vince Russo before coming back? Like, did you spend any time with him in 1995 before you left?
Oh, yeah. He was a magazine writer. And this goes into the 94, 95. That was his job as a magazine writer, is to do features on talent. And I'll just say this diplomatically, the brash Long Islander, New Yorker that Vince is, not everybody was, I don't say not happy, not agreeable. Hey, it's a magazine. And I'm thinking, again, what you said, that I got the leg up in understanding. Hell, I wanted every amount of coverage I could get in 94, 95. So I did magazine features. We did photo shoots. We did the OJ Simpson thing was hot. Me and Road Dogg went out and did a feature in LA at OJ's house. But anyway, me and Vince struck up a relationship because I was a very agreeable talent to invest time in the magazine. And I just viewed it that way. So yeah, me and Vince's relationship started in 94 through the magazine exposure.
I know you said eventually, you're going to have to talk to Vince McMahon. Everything goes through Vince McMahon, blah, blah, blah. But I'm trying to get drilled down here, and I feel like you're not answering, and maybe it's intentional, maybe it's accidental. Did you have a conversation with Vince Russo prior to coming over to work, or prior to leaving WCW, prior to being on camera for the
yes. Yeah, but Vince was, hey, as I'll say, from a friend to friend, how's things going up there? What's going on? And those were not one conversation. I guess you could say in that year, I never lost contact with Vince, if that makes sense. Yeah, Russo.
Moving forward, let's say Russo and McMahon, just so we don't get each other tripped up. But
last names.
Hypothetically, did Russo float? Bro, I can see you in Austin. Do you remember that?
Never.
Okay.
Never. But those were the type conversations.
You think I'm making that up, but Russo said that you did. So I'm asking you because Russo it's out there.
What?
Russo has said many times that he wanted you and Austin to work together.
Yeah, but after the fact, after I got up there, I thought you're talking beforehand.
Yes.
Yeah. So none of those type conversations happened before I returned.
And then as the story goes, you're welcomed to a Monday Night Raw. This is October 20th, 1997. And I guess your contract was due every October. I think we've talked about that before here on the program. Your contract had been up how long with WCW before you're on this program here in 97?
So what's your specific question?
All right, you're here at the show October 20th, 1997. If you had to guess, when would you reckon that your WCW deal was up? How fresh off of your WCW contract were you?
Days. The first Nitro I could appear at.
The first Raw you could appear at.
My bad. Yeah, my bad. First Raw. Yes.
And so here we are now, and I believe it's Oklahoma City. Is that right?
You know what? What day? Because we're going to find something here. What day is this Raw?
It's a Monday, October 20th.
Okay. The China, and this is where it's sort of crazy recall. I think October 17th was, that because we'll know on the China deal, because it was the first day that I was out of contract. So whenever the Good Housekeeping match was the exact date of the rollover, dating back to the Double J deal, because it literally, Double J in 93 was a 3-year deal. And then it rolled over a year for WCW, and then a 2-year deal. It's like literally every October.
So just to, again, context is king. You're on this Nitro on the 6th in Minneapolis, and even
the 13th.
It's discussed there that I think it's just a backstage thing. Deborah slaps Mongo, and you're standing nearby. And then 1 week later, so your last appearance is in Tampa for WCW, that Nitro. And 7 days later, you show up on Raw.
Yep.
And I assume between the 13th and the 20th is when, during those 7 days, is when you flew to meet with Vince and took your dad and all that, right?
Maybe the meeting in Vince and Greenwich would have been several weeks before that, because I had to know if I'm going to have a deal.
Right.
I want to say a couple of weeks before, but that's a good question. But it wasn't, I don't think it was that week, because look, I don't, it wasn't that quick a turnaround deal to my knowledge.
So somehow you guys, I guess what I'm trying to drive to is, you don't have a deal when you appear on TV October 20th, 1997. You were not signed.
Oh no, I was.
The narrative is out there that they had a deal with you in theory, that we were working towards a contract, but you had not yet put pen to paper when you went out and cut the promo. The idea being, we know we're going to do it. Yeah, we're going to do business, but we got to get this angle going, this promo going. We're in the throes of the Monday Night War, and they're marching towards their biggest pay-per-view they've ever had, Starrcade 97. And along the way, they're going to do big business at Halloween Havoc 97. And we're in the fight for our life here, Jeff, and blah, blah, blah. So the story was out there that you, when you did this promo that we're about to play, you had not yet actually signed the sheet of paper, but you're saying that's not correct. You had signed.
It's semantics. So maybe a deal memo, but the terms, the dollars were agreed upon.
Okay. Carry me through what you remember of that day. This is your first appearance. Again, remember now, we're in the height of the Monday Night War. The last time we saw Jeff Jarrett was last Monday on the other channel. And now he's about to walk out down the ramp here at the Marriott Convention Center in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, in front of 8,334 fans. Chat me up. What are you told before you go out there about what to say or what not to say or how to get your business done?
So we had agreed upon, and I say we, me and Vince, and
Russo or McMahon.
Good. Russo. My bad. McMahon. It was my start date's the whatever that Raw was, the 20th, and all this kind of stuff. And then it was, you go through the song and dance of talent relations and travel and whatever it may be. But it was set in stone. I'm starting on that Monday, and Vince Russo is going to get with you on the promo. And so the couple of days before that, I mean, he came, all kinds of stuff. He was talking about the Ahmed Johnson, the roadie, the singing cowboy. And, as the Attitude Era shifted, and Vince is saying, bro, this and bro, that. But no, I'm saying that out of all jest. But, he's saying that, look, no cowboy hat. And which I agreed. It was, we got to see Jeff Jarrett and that whole, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. We're I was all in agreement that Double J was such an over the top character. Let's go with the Attitude. And Stone Cold was, you talk about red hot, and Shawn and Brett, and just everything about the company had radically changed from a creative perspective that the whole world knows. The shift from the new era. No, what was it called? Yeah, the new era. What was
new Attitude? No, Next Generation.
that was those days were long gone. And so I was, me and Diesel and Razor and all that, we were that generation. So Jeff's got to be, for lack of a better word, the evolution of the character has to come hard and heavy. And Vince McMahon was for sure. I mean, he was all in on it, and we got to come up with the promo that works. Okay. So go ahead. I want to make sure that I'm following your question.
No, I'm with you. What we were looking for is new generation, not next generation. And then we mixed in attitude.
New generation was dead.
Yeah.
The attitude era had come upon.
And hell, we can't even get our Vinces straight. Now let's play the audio here from the promo, and if you've ever, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, yeah. So yeah. So I don't know if you want to play the interview first or afterwards, but it was this day right here, the Evansville, Indiana about check. This is another communication is key. But again, I don't know if you want comments before or after or both.
Well, before we go, let's mention that. Before we press play, Russo wrote in a blog post back when those were still a thing, quote, "The day of his return, I wrote an in-ring promo for Jeff, as I wrote all his in-ring promos. Jeff is just one of those guys that liked you to write his verbiage for him. After giving him his words, Jeff read through the promo and came back to me. Upon his return, he said everything was good, but that he was going to add one little thing. I'll let you respond to the one little thing later, but by and large, is what Russo's saying here accurate, that he wrote this promo and most of your promos?"
So short answer, yes. Vince, and I can remember having this conversation with my father about, this is not on this subject. I'm talking about 93. Man, they really like to get into like exact wordings. And, at Memphis TV, Lawler or my father would give you 2 or 3 bullet points, but I mean high level bullet points. And then you had to go put it in your own words. That's what I was born and raised on. And then I get to the WWF and the Double J character. And I mean, just the simplistic spell your name on those opening vignettes. No. And Bruce would look, and it was such a learning curve, but in education, we're going to do the same thing, repetition over and over and over again. World's greatest singer, world's greatest entertainer, world's greatest wrestler. Ha ha. That's Double J, Jeff Jarrett. And I don't want to say scripted, but yes, your signature lines had to be delivered. And then a lot of it began scripted. So I would have those conversations with my old man, and he's like, "Son, let me just tell you something. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. 1. 2, if they don't like what you say, but you've gone off on a tangent, dude, it's all on you. So do what they say, do what they ask. Okay, that makes sense." And so no matter what, and certainly my first night coming in, yes, and Vince is like, "I'm going to write the promos." As time went on and I wore multiple hats, Bill Banks, Jeremy Borash, others can attest, Dutch would never write it out. He didn't come from that generation. But other guys that were working for me, they would write it out. And it was to my best interest to go by that because they had thought it through. And I'm over here worried about finishes and contracts and Dixie and Bob Carter and 1,000 other things. But yes, Vince wrote my promos. That was his job. And he wrote a lot of other guys' promos, but he absolutely did write mine.
So without further ado, let's listen to what Vince Russo wrote and Jeff Jarrett said. This is from Oklahoma City, October 20th, 1997. If you want to watch this at home, we're 25 minutes and 57 seconds in. 3, 2, 1, play.
And
we have company.
Yes, we do. We have a visitor, and he was not expected to join us.
Sorry, Vince. I know you wanted the big introduction. You want to be standing up here beside me, but I've got something to say, and I'm going to say it right now. Last week on Monday Nitro, Jeff Jarrett was declared everything but dead. Since I refused to accept Eric Bischoff's offer and re-sign with WCW, he did everything within his power to bury me. Being the coward that he is, he even hid behind his computer and announced to the whole world that he had pulled the offer off the table. Well, Eric, the only thing that you ever pulled from Jeff Jarrett was opportunity. Since I wasn't one of your boys, you put a lid on my potential. I was only going to go as far as you wanted me to. There was never, ever any ladder of success for me to climb.
Very candid comments from Jeff Jarrett.
I was one of the youngest, most talented wrestlers that you had, Eric. But you let me drown in mediocrity just because my stroke wasn't strong enough. Look who you booked me with, an ex-football player who can't even lock up. And his wife, she gives new meaning to the phrase dumb blind. Vince, don't sit over there and snicker and smile and cherish this moment. Because I left the WWF 2 years ago for the same reason. Eric Bischoff did it out of either ignorance or inexperience of the wrestling business. What were your excuses? Remember the gold tooth?
The gold tooth.
Yeah, you think it's real cute and funny. Remember the gold tooth, the country music star? Vince, you had a vision of what you wanted Double J, Jeff Jarrett to be. And quite honestly, in all due respect, your vision sucked.
Yeah, they have.
You booked me with a clown, a drug addict, a black man who can't even speak the English language. Vince, you tried to bury me and you tried to kill me off, but you didn't get the job done. I guess you figured since you didn't put my dad out of business, just like you put every other wrestling promoter out in the 80s, since you couldn't do that, you figured the next best thing would be to kill his son off. Well, Vince, not only did I survive, but I walked out on you. And how ironic that is that we make a deal and get back together and you pay me. That's right. You pay me a whole lot more money the second go around. And you know why, Vince? You know why? Because you need Jeff Jarrett. You need me to put people in seats and ratings on the board. Vince, you told me to come out here tonight and shoot. And that's exactly what I'm doing, right between your eyes. You can take With My Baby Tonight and stick it up your butt. Because from here on out, it's gonna be Jeff Jarrett's way. And if you try, that's exactly right. If you try to stop me, fine. I'll gladly pack my bags and walk right out the door again. But Vince, I've got a question. I've got a question to ask you. Can you afford it? I don't think so, or you wouldn't have paid me all that money just 5 days ago. Now, on with the state of affairs in the World Wrestling Federation. Bret Hart, the best there was. Bret, you are so right, with was being the key word. All your past accomplishments, you've been living on name recognition, all the respect you've gained over the last 15 years, well, that runs out tonight. And Shawn Michaels, physically, this guy can only wrestle once a week, and he's proud of that. He's proud of that. Shawn, you call yourself the showstopper, the main eventer, the icon that can still go. Well, I got a question. How often can you go? It seems lately all you do is run around here, put silly little signs, point at your crotch, and give your little hand signals to your boys in Atlanta. John, one day you were the main event. You were WWF champion. You were the attraction. But now all you are is reduced because you're so broken down to hiding behind your infantile attitude. And speaking of attitude, what about Steve Austin? Now here's a guy who has lowered himself to shaving his head and coming out here every week, not once or twice, but 10 or 15 times, and saying the word ass. That's right, saying the word ass just to get a reaction, just to get noticed. Stone Cold, no, Stone Cold, you will always be the ringmaster. And as far as your, ladies and gentlemen, Stone Cold, as far as your blasphemous merchandise, that offends me. Austin 316 offends me because what you're doing is ripping off the Bible to put money in your pockets.
Hey, you get what you pay for, McMahon. Don't try to stop him now.
Oh,
Shut the
it's
mic
going to
off.
be your judgment day.
Yeah.
Vince, you wanted the real Jeff Jarrett tonight. Well, you got him. I just hope your investment's going to be worth all your headaches.
And certainly so do we. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue with action. Yes, matter of fact.
Well, lots to unpack here, as I like to say, before we get into all that. What'd you think of the segment overall?
You know, and I can't say that I've watched this. I probably watched that just due to history and everything a couple of times. I thought it was delivered. Mission accomplished, I think, to not go off in a rabbit hole and nitpick it, and I'll let you nitpick it and I'll respond. But the overall segment, mission accomplished. I told a backstory. I tried to put a nail in the old Double J character, the horse, the light, everything we were trying to do there and move forward and have attitude, give a little context to the attitude, you know, the Monday Night Wars with Bischoff and that story, and tried to bring people up to speed that, okay, Jeff's been away from the WWF a year. I thought it was a sports entertainment, professional wrestling, attitude era, scripted promo. I thought it checked every box. I thought it was delivered well. I thought when you hear Vince and JR and Lawler throw in there, and I just, the chemistry and hearing Vince on commentary, you know, a lot of new fans can't even imagine that, but I think Vince is the best straight guy, play-by-play in the history of the business. I think he's just phenomenal. And I was, to this day, I was very, very happy with the segment.
A little long for me.
Yeah, I got you. Just, you know, anyway, but devil's advocate of that was they hadn't seen me on WWF program in a long time. And I agree with you, but also know that, gosh, how do we get all the story in? But anyway, that's nitpicking. Agreed though.
So, as we said before we pressed play, Russo said you changed one little thing. I feel like I can guess, but what was the one little thing?
Okay, you're assuming that he's telling the truth.
Okay, so you're assuming, or based on your recollection, then that was written and Russo hung out to dry here.
So the first, we'll call it sheet of paper,
first draft
that he gave me, he had, when I got down to the closing lines of the promo, he had it written. And this is where, again, communication is so vital. And I solely depended on Vince Russo. He had me mentioning Austin first, then Shawn Michaels, then Bret Hart. And I said, Vince, no. I said, Austin is red hot. Well, no, Bret's been around. I said, I get that, but we need to end with Austin. And if you hear the promo and the people started chanting, Austin, Austin, Austin was the most over babyface. He was red hot. I was going to say closing lines and all of that. And I said, Vince, and Vince, he talked about change. He knew exactly what I was going to say. And the little thing that I changed that he wants to say he didn't know. And look, I've heard him. Let me say this. I've heard others talk about Jeff. He threw you under the bus. He said he didn't know this and didn't know that. And as we get into this whole following 2 years that followed up with this, Vince was like anybody, and like he did later at TNA, he was just doing his best to protect his ass out of job security. But he knew exactly what I was going to say all the way through the promo, from the beginning to the end. And the drug addict line on talking about Road Dogg, I was a little uneasy about that, because I'm like, I sort of see, but I was already gone. That was a mess, but I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm going to do as, let's roll. It wasn't a hill to die on.
So you're saying here now that Russo is the person who wrote the blasphemous line?
No, I suggested, okay, if we're going to get technical, I suggested it and Vince knew I was going to say it.
So it wasn't you going off the cuff in the ring?
No.
So as the story goes, you walk backstage. Well, let me ask this. How did you feel walking up the ramp? You toss the mic, get out of the ring, walk up the ramp, come through the curtain. As you're doing that, did you feel like, nailed that, got the response I wanted? Because in fairness, there weren't big pops for Brett and Sean as you're saying that, because they're both heels. This is knee deep into Brett being the Canadian hero who hates America. Sean, of course, is up and running with DX. So they're both heels. So when you mentioned Austin and the crowd starts chanting Austin, he's the first quote unquote baby face that you've listed. So it feels like, in a traditional wrestling sense, boy, we've checked all the boxes. Were you proud of this? Did you feel like you'd hit a home run, or did you think, man, got to keep working at it, not my best outing? Or did you feel like, nailed it?
Nailed it. Just candidly, Conrad, I went, hell yes. And if you're going to end on something, the top red hot baby face, something that I was born and raised and tried and true, if a heel came in the territory and Lawler had him go out as a booker, or my dad had them go out as a booker and start knocking guys that were semi-main event or mid-card, you kind of knew, okay, that's the storyline they're putting in. But if you walk out through the curtain, no matter who it is or when it happens, if you start knocking Jerry Lawler, you're perceived, boom. Maybe not your storyline, but you're perceived as a top guy. And so, yes, when I finished that promo walking up and the people were booing the hell out of me, I'm like, the two things that I felt good about, because I was very concerned, because I felt the Double J character over the top, that really had a hell of a run and got over. And so now the Attitude Era, I got to shift gears, and I got to make a hard right shifting gears. And I felt I did that in that promo.
So Russo would write in his blog, quote, Steve was on the other side of the curtain waiting for him when he came back. Steve was freaking furious. I mean, his bald head was blood red. As soon as Jeff came to the back, Steve was verbally all over him, holding nothing back. He told Jeff that he was messing with his livelihood and that he didn't appreciate that. Jeff backpedaled like I've never seen anyone backpedal before or since. It was literally the heel backing off the baby, but this was not scripted. So that's what Russo's put out there. Is that how it happened?
When I walked through the curtain, two people met me almost simultaneously. And to this day, I hadn't gone back and asked the other person, like, how did you know to be there? Were you there by luck? But I saw Steve making a beeline for me, and Shawn Michaels was right there. And I don't want to say he got between us, but he did. It's not like he was doing a pull apart, but Shawn stayed right there, and Steve dog cussed me.
So you felt like Sean knew this was coming and he wanted to.
I really don't know if he was there in guerrilla by luck, or supposed to be up next segment, or maybe Sean just, okay, I want to watch, me and Sean go back to 86, 7, buds. Maybe he just wanted to watch my promo, or maybe he wanted to be at Gorilla as my bud and get a reaction or see the reaction of the office or whatever it was. Sean was there. And they met me about simultaneously. And maybe Sean knew that Steve was furious, but Steve dog cussed me. And I couldn't get a word out for me to say, Steve, I did that on purpose. Steve, yes, I didn't mean to offend you, but here's my psychology. And this is what I kept trying to say. Steve, I'm a heel. Everything I said out there is a TV show. Whether I believe it or not, it's a TV show. I did it by design. Do you think I'm really trying to hurt your merchandise? No. Do you really think I have the ability? Don't put me on a pedestal and say, oh, Jeff can really hurt my merch. That's preposterous to me. Just silly. To this day, it's silly that a heel can affect Steve's merchandise sales. That's kind of jumping the shark there.
But he probably remembers back.
Oh, for sure.
Evansville, Indiana.
Yes.
And just like your daddy before you, now you're here to mess with his money. And he probably feels at the time, I got something. I got something going here. I'm not going to let him or anybody else take it from me. And I got more stroke around here, pardon the pun, than you do. I'm going to put a stop to this right now. And I'm going to tell him how I really feel about it.
And here's, again, that was my first night back in the company. So I had no context that JR, Steve wasn't JR's boy. JR was Steve's boy. I mean, that's the reality of the, and I get it. That's how it goes. Vince owned the company, but with all the, again, hindsight's 2020, Steve having the neck injury, that what did Steve really have? His mouth and his merch.
That's it.
And I get it. I didn't have a freaking clue that night, and I get it. But harboring that resentment, and look, I've been around talent and people, and I'm sure you have too. Different people are cut from. Randy Savage is one that always thought people were out to get him. I never understood that. Even when Randy was long retired, it's just sort of the nature of the beast. But when he came through and started venting, I just was like, he can't be serious. But he was 100% serious. But now, as I look back, and even not just weeks and months, literally days, I went, he really wants to hold on to that merch, and I get it. But man, damn, I wish I had Russo, told Russo, go approve this with Steve. I just didn't think it was needed. Look, hindsight's 2020. Vince McMahon loves controversy. He's a promoter. He wants to create that edge and that uneasiness. And the best thing you can do is get people to buy in. And Lawler and Dundee, I was born and raised on that. They would say stuff to get the other one riled up legit, but it was good for business. And they both knew that. They absolutely both knew that if you sort of blur the lines, it works.
Let me mention, because I don't know that this is, I'll be honest, I don't know how WWE Creative works now. I've never asked, not going to ask, but I'm of the opinion that these days, Vince at least sees all of the quote unquote scripts.
Yes.
Actual verbiage that guys are saying. Back then, it felt more like Vince would have approved the format of the show, but maybe not been as particular about approving the individual scripts. And when I'm saying Vince, I mean McMahon.
Yeah.
My question is, did you believe in this era that when you talked about a change to a promo like this with Russo, that Russo would have then went and taken that change to McMahon? I guess what I'm trying to figure out is because, and maybe people listening to this haven't put two and two together, but Austin, we all know, made a whole bunch of money on his t-shirts. You want to guess who made more money than he did on those t-shirts? Vincent Kennedy McMahon.
Yes, sir.
And so as we're listening to that promo. And when you say Austin 316 or blasphemous or whatever you said, however you said it, you could hear an audible, oh, and then there's a little talk over it where Lawler's like, well, you invited him here. Don't cut him off now. And then JR even says, cut his mic off. Now, of course, they're babyface commentators. JR is at that era, and Lawler's a heel. So that makes sense. But I'm trying to dig in and ask, do you think McMahon knew you were going to say this?
Yes. Oh, okay. No, that's a Vince Russo. Vince Russo said, I don't know, but I feel certain.
Hang on.
Yeah. Cause we're saying Vince's.
No, I didn't say Vince. I said McMahon, and you said yes, and then said no. So here's your Men in Black. Stop. Hang on. Here's your Men in Black. All right. Nothing's ever happened. Did Vince McMahon know you were going to say the fucking t-shirt was blasphemous?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe that.
Okay. And it didn't go well.
I finally got you to wake up over there.
Well, no, I'm, but every time I've asked you something, you said yes, no. And it's like, no, yes. And I'm wondering,
you're full of shit.
On today's episode, I've never seen somebody get more confused about Vince's. Yeah. So I just want to make sure you discussed the verbiage change with Russo.
Yes.
And I wanted to know, because I think we as fans have been led to believe these days McMahon approves verbiage. Back then, if you changed verbiage with Russo, we believe, both you and I, that Russo, not only did he have the ability to say yes, but he still probably went and ran it past McMahon. True?
True.
Because it is
far at this point too, which adds a layer later, because when it goes from Ferrari, it's the whole chain of command. But yes, in this time, it was Vince Russo, the writer of Raw, that Vince would, whatever we'd collaborate with talent, and that was my understanding, but certainly on this night, hey, Vince, I want to put Austin last, move Brett here, and I want to say this about blasphemous. It'll get a hell of a rise. Yep, okay, oh, boom, boom. Yeah, go to McMahon. That was his job.
So there's a shouting match. How does the shouting match end? How do we leave that skirmish, dust up, conversation, confrontation? What happens to get it to where, okay, people are walking away now?
My best recollection, Steve just said his last cussing out and walked off.
And you backpedaled and took it and apologized and said, hey man, we talked about this beforehand. I thought you were in the loop. My bad. Something such like that.
Yes. It was just like, hey, and I remember Sean standing there and walked up and said, well, good job, Jeff. I mean, literally as a joke. And I'm like, dude, he's serious. He goes, oh yeah, he's very serious. And I'm like, wow. And Sean just chuckled. Howdy boy, kid. Get heat first night in. You're only supposed to get it with the people, not the boys in the back. It was like a joke.
Yeah. So as the story goes, Austin finds Vince Russo, because I guess you faded the heat to him, cuts a promo on Russo and talks about how he had to live on potatoes while working for your dad in Memphis.
You know what? I'm sitting here getting irritated at myself when you're saying that I'm back. You know, truth be known, if we're going to just get all the cards on the table, I'm pissed off at the researcher, how little research he did for this episode.
Well, just tell us what happened.
No, look, me and Steve met each other in 87, 88. Nothing was put in the notes today about that. Nothing.
Well, that's not what we're talking about, Jeff.
I know, but we're talking about, you're saying all this and that and all this. I'm freaking pissed off that no more thought was put into this on the ad-free guys. So if that's why I'm irritated, folks, that's why I'm irritated.
And just to be clear,
hey gang, I want to do my very best for my world. The very, very best for our listeners.
I thought the crux of what we're talking about today is the old check and the slap on the back that you and I've talked about before in Evansville, Indiana.
That has to do with 316.
And the promo. Because
what does Evansville have to do with 316? We can say that about everything.
No.
About Jeff Jarrett's relationship with Steve Austin. And
here's what it has to do with it.
I'm off base. I'm off base.
Here's what it has to do with it. When Austin left your backstage confrontation with you, where you apparently faded the heat to Russo, Austin went straight to Russo and quoted the line about living off potatoes while working in Memphis. That is a direct correlation to the check conversation, in my opinion. Russo would also say this: Steve Austin harbored a lot of resentment towards the Jarrett family due to the way he was treated in Memphis. While Steve could only afford potatoes, Jeff was catered to, as the Booker's son. Jerry had a huge mansion in Hendersonville, and both of them lived a good life while Steve was getting around on $40 a night. So the reason the slap on the back and the check is relevant is because that's the reason he was explaining to Russo. He was upset about what you said, that he felt like you were messing with his money, and he felt like your dad had done it before. And clearly the whole check thing grew a life of its own as a result.
Fair enough. But that is Steve's. And look, he, without question, shouldn't have said it. And that was his opinion, and it grew and grew and grew. But just as equally is Jerry Jarrett saying, let's give Steve a job in Memphis. Let's put Steve with Jeff, and they work together, and they'll work night after night. Isn't that equally as important of the story behind the story?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if you want to tell the good stuff, my apologies. We were just going to how you guys got crossed.
The yin and the yang of the whole story.
I understand. I disagree, but I understand. I thought we were talking about how the thing got sideways. But let's chat about what happened in the fallout from this whole shebang backstage. After there's this big confrontation, is there a sit down? Is there an attempt to mend fences or squash the heat?
Nope.
Did you ever talk to Vince McMahon about this?
Nope.
Did you talk to Jim Ross about it?
Nope.
In your mind's eye, and this happens a lot, I've heard, you tell me, guys get cross with each other all the time. Something goes wrong in the ring, an errant blow hits, somebody thinks somebody stiffened somebody thinks they forgot to shake so-and-so's hands. But eventually, this is just, man, we're putting on a show, emotions are running high, guys get frustrated, guys get pissed off, and then guess what? They get over it. That's what guys do. And in your mind's eye, is that what this was? Or did you feel like, oh no, this is different, and you knew it right away?
There was a night in Newark at the Hilton where one of those deals where we all come back for a town, and a lot of folks are checking in relatively at the same time. We're all waiting to get room keys and check in and all that. And I don't know if I was there first or Steve was there first, but we see each other, and he looks over at me. He says, "Hey man, you going to the gym tomorrow?" And I said, "Yep." And he says, "You want to ride?" "Yep." And I mean, I literally thought in a lot of ways that it was completely what you just said, water under the bridge. It was ugly, but as sort of time went on, and look, I went and did the NWA thing and whatever it may be. It was, I guess, for lack of a better word, cooler heads prevailed. That I thought it was, I thought the reality of the situation of Jeff Jarrett affecting merchandise sales was
a little silly,
preposterously just a complete non-issue. And that's where I thought.
But it does mean that he's got some underlying feelings towards you. But you again feel like sometimes guys just need to get that out of their system. Right. And then you move on.
Yeah. And the check in Evansville thing, I can't remember specifically if it was during this era, but when I heard all that, but again, I'm going back to, I don't want to say me and Steve broke in together because I was a couple of years in front of him, but in our early formative years, when we both got $40 payoffs, we'd sort of come up that way and just sort of had an understanding of the wrestling industry. That's sort of the point of reference that I thought we were at, but boy, was I wrong.
Who's the first person who told you the check story? Do you recall?
I don't. And I wish I did. And see, I don't think it was Russo, but maybe it was, but I really don't recall. And again, if it was Russo, my gut tells me that I would have completely dismissed it. And the reason being, not that I thought any more of any less of Steve. I literally said that comment, and that comment was said to me. I can't tell you how many times, hundreds, passing out checks. If I wasn't the one passing them out, others, hey, don't look at it. Don't look at it. You ain't going to be happy. Just, it literally was a sort of a running thread. Territory, Dutch Mantell says that story that.
Oh, the Dutch story is the best. There's a legendary story out there about Dutch when steroids bubble to the surface and it's a major conflict and conversation for Vince McMahon. Allegedly, your dad stands in front of everybody and says, "Now I want to make sure none of you boys are on steroids." And as the story goes, Dutch raises his hand and says, "Hell, Jerry, some of us ain't on food," which is
story. That's Dutch.
Such a great line.
That relationship, if you really look at it, my dad could have, in his mind, went, that Dutch Mantell, that worthless piece of blah, 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 blah. But the context was they had worked together, they had drawn money together, they had good payoffs together and bad payoffs together. And that's Dutch's sort of making light of the situation. Don't cry over it, laugh over it.
So, you have conversations a lot about, I was riding with Road Dog and, me and Sean were tight and well, we were out at the bar, blah, blah, blah. Do you have that sort of interaction with Steve moving forward, or are you guys just acquaintances at best?
Obviously we're on the road all the time.
Yeah.
But everybody sort of has their traveling partners. So I don't want to say we were traveling partners, but like I said, he asked me to go to the gym that time. There was multiple times going to the gym or rides or this or that. And, going in airports. Hey, is our flight delayed? There was never, in my perspective, my viewpoint, zero friction.
That was just water under the bridge at that point.
Completely.
Well, as everyone knows, not long after your debut, you're repackaged with Jim Cornette. You win the NWA North American title with Barry Windham over Barry Windham. Of course, that's a conversation for another day. We'll break all that down in great detail, but I want to zip right to right after you win. Steve Austin comes out, stuns you, mocks the strut, and gives you the middle fingers and walks away. And obviously, Steve Austin being in your segment, hey, that's pretty cool. Did you think, oh shit, maybe we're getting to work together? And do you remember it being sort of pulled out from under you?
I remember this specific high spot. When Steve did the strut, I took it as if, all right. Now he could have stunned me and got up and beers and fingers and all that, but he kind of put my gimmick over by strutting. It helped me. Even if his strut was maybe the worst of all time, but no, him stunning me and mocking my strut, just like that's what a babyface does to get a heel over. Psychology wise, I'm going to make fun of his gimmick. It helps me. That's the psychology of the whole deal. So when he did it, I'm like, all right. Now, did I think we were going to work a program? Absolutely not. But I thought, great piece of business. Help both of us. He could have stunned me and walked off, but he stunned me and strutted, which was to my benefit, not his.
So Russo would write, when we arrived at TV, Steve pulled me in a room and read me the riot act, citing everything he had told me verbatim 6 months prior. Steve hadn't forgotten one word of our conversation, not one. After apologizing because he was right and I was wrong, I changed the show to meet Steve's wishes. So it feels as if at least the original plan was you were going to have an opportunity to work with him, and Steve just flatly refused to Russo. When were you made aware of that conversation, or did you know that day?
That night. Yeah. I mean, and that's when, look, Steve was working with Kane and Taker and a lot of big guys. And I know Vince, and Vince was, rightly or wrongly so, he was high on giving Austin a different type heel to work with. And that's, look, he was in charge of writing a 2-hour show, 52 weeks a year. That was his mindset. It's not like I got up on my soapbox and pitched 15 creative ideas to Vince for me to work with Austin. That would be silly. I knew it had to go through a lot of layers, but when that got, when Vince told me, I'm just like, oh boy, it's still sticking.
So Austin's also talked about this moment. He says, quote, then we get to the Gund Arena and they said, okay, Steve, we want you to work a match with Jeff Jarrett. And I said, what? You want me to work with who? And they said, Jeff Jarrett. I said, I think Vince Russo was telling me this. I said, all right, come here. So we walk into McMahon's room. It might have been me, Vince, Jim Ross, and about 5 other people. I said, F this, MSF. These were the best damn cussing jobs. I said, I told you, son of a bitches, I never wanted to work with the guy. And now you're going to make me come here and play the bad guy. So now Steve is shot down working with you here officially. And he's even said in other interviews, this is on a Get in the Ring radio appearance that Steve
Can I
did.
press pause there? What did MSF mean?
I think motherfucker. I mean, he's abbreviating the bad words.
MS. That's what
I think S is shit and F is fuck.
Yeah.
Those are
the other thing that jumped out on that was he said, make me the bad guy. How is it the bad guy when he's the top guy calling all the shots and the whole world knew that? Why does he give a shit if he's the bad guy? That always struck me as, interesting comment.
Well, I think his thing is, hey, I'm the bad guy to the writing crew because they had something written and now I'm saying you got to write something else. Like, I don't mean to, not the bad guy from your perspective, but from theirs.
Got it.
He says in a Get in the Ring radio interview, quote, Jarrett wasn't physical enough. He didn't hit the ropes hard enough. And it wasn't a case of me being able to bring him up, more of a case of him bringing me down because of how hot I was. I'm not out there UFC shoot fighting, but Jesus Christ, lay some stuff in on me, bust my mouth, whatever. That's the way I did it when I was feeding comebacks on DX and all those guys. I mean, guys would be walking backstage, busted lips and noses, loose teeth. I was throwing sledgehammers in there and people were crazy. That's just the way it was. He can't hit the ropes hard enough to bust an egg. I had a violent I'm glad you laughed because I read it twice. I was like, don't laugh. Yeah. But I've never heard that before.
I've heard this quote. Go ahead.
He can't hit the ropes hard enough to bust an egg. I had a violent physical work style. I mean, Jesus, you want to work with me? Bring it. Woof. A lot to unpack here. You think everything's okay, and then this is years later when he's saying all of this. How did you feel when you're reading all this and hearing? First of all, I could see both sides. Like, I've always thought the idea was make it look like it hurts and you don't feel a thing. I love when guys say, man, that super kick Shawn Michaels had, I never felt a thing. That sort of thing. This is a different approach. And you were probably brought up in an era where you're trying to work 7 nights a week and that lends itself to, hey, let's put on a good show, but let's live to fight another day, which is probably why however the hell old you are, you've been in wrestling 35 years, 0 surgeries. So it's hard for me to poke holes in your style, but when you read this from a star like Steve Austin, I'm just curious how that makes, how do you process that?
I've been accused of a lot of things in my career, bad, good, up, down, but not being able to hit the ropes or break an egg or that kind of stuff. I get it. He didn't like me because of the check thing. He didn't like me at this point because of the Deborah thing. He didn't like me because of the resentment on my father and the pay. I get all that, but not liking my work style. And I can tell you, I won't name agents and executives, but he said that in an open room, I think to multiple people, even Russo, but there were people who came to me and I said, what? He goes, yeah. And they rolled their eyes to me that, And I'm like, Jesus, I get that he doesn't really want to say that he doesn't want to work with me because I'm an old man or whatever, but find something better to criticize.
I agree.
But I get it. Hey, look, he's the top guy, and he who writes the checks writes the rules, and he was making Vince McMahon a lot of money, so he was writing his rules. I get it. I totally get it. I got it then just as much as I get it now that he's the top guy and going to call the shots. But I chuckled when I heard that he didn't like how I hit the ropes.
Of course, Deborah's a part of this story as well. You referenced her in your promo here from October 20th, 1997. She's going to come over almost a year later to the day, October 19th, 1998. At this point, everybody knows that Deborah and Steve would eventually get married, but you two, you being Jeff Jarrett, the other part of that too being Deborah McMichael, they're going to be put together. And boy, that had to just fly all over Steve. When did you first know that Steve and Deborah were dating and they have a relationship budding here?
And see, what's crazy is I didn't even know Deborah was coming. No idea till Russo told me, I think the one Raw before she showed up. I'm like, oh, dude, we just went down that road in WCW. It doesn't really work. Well, no, I think, but, and I don't think, I don't, there wasn't a master plan because Lawler later got the puppies over and my bad, Road Dogg got the puppies over and Lawler kept saying it every week in, week out. But, obviously Steve and Deborah weren't together when she arrived at all. And, she was my valet. And again, it was sort of all in water, and Owen and me were teaming. It was just, it was, me and Owen were, as you can imagine, the second generation guys. I was Don't Piss Me Off. And Owen was, I'm not a nugget, but what was his other saying? Enough is enough.
And it's time for a change. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that was the vibe. So it was a little bit unique. But look, I've said this story before because it sort of caught me so by surprise that, we're on an overseas flight and Percy, and me ended up, sitting across from aisle each other. And I don't know, we were 3, 4, 5 seats behind Steve and Deborah, and they had sat down beside each other. I had no real clue. I don't think a lot of us did. And all of a sudden, I think Deborah put her hand on Steve's knee and Percy gigged me and he goes, "You're dead." And I sort of looked at him like, huh? And he gave me the heads and look up front. And I was like, oh, damn, they are together. Look, I had no idea that the relationship had started. But I mean, it was what it was. Me, Owen, and Deborah were on-screen characters, but that was real life. And Stone Cold being Stone Cold, he didn't even have a tag partner, let alone some on-screen characters. So it was what it was, as far as business goes.
But you didn't feel like it was going to affect business at that point.
Gosh, no, not at all.
So we're in the exact same scenario. Vince Russo is going to propose it again in late 99. You're calling out Steve Austin. He's coming out and hitting you with stunners. It comes to a head on July 26th. There were 2 names proposed, according to the Observer. These are potential opponents for Austin. Austin would shoot down Billy Gunn, saying it can be something that they build to instead of just throwing it on Raw in a cold match. But regarding you, Meltzer writes this, quote, "Jarrett is another story. Austin did next a planned program with Jarrett, with Austin believing Jarrett isn't over enough to where it would make sense for a guy in his position to work with him. The feeling within the company is that if Jarrett were to get over to the level the company wants him to be, that Austin might consider working with him at that point, although there are other mitigating factors. There's apparently personal animosity regarding Jarrett cutting a promo criticizing Austin 316, and that it was taken seriously. And he apparently has told people he doesn't want to be the person who picks Jarrett up to a level he hasn't been able to attain. Even more, Austin, who is together in real life with Deborah, complained that he didn't want a wrestling angle to interfere with his real life, and he didn't want to be in the position of not being able to hang around in places with Deborah because those two would be feuding on television." Now, that last piece, while it may seem like a nice little cover story, there's still a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit of kayfabe in the late 90s. I could almost believe that Steve, being Steve, a guy who, as we've heard most of the time in this era, he rode by himself. He was the lone wolf. He didn't travel with anybody, that he would want to make sure that he had his woman traveling with him. And well, if he's in a feud with you and she's with her, that might not look right. What'd you make of that write up from the Observer here?
Because there had been so much water under the bridge, and I couldn't hit the ropes and the check and the promo. I was actually surprised when Russo, I want to make sure I get my Vinces and don't irritate you anymore, but when Russo proposed, let's go down this route again, that surprised me. But I'm like, okay, Vince McMahon is not going to do anything he doesn't want to do. It's his show, and he writes he's the ultimate executive producer. But when we started down that road again with the Stunners, I was like, okay, maybe things have changed. And because I don't know how many weeks, but Conrad, we did several weeks of Stunners.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, let's sort of see where this goes. But it surprised me that it was even tabled again. But then their relationship, and I knew that could get, not that so much from the kayfabe component, he just didn't want to be involved with his real life girlfriend on camera, even if it was opposing sides. I got that. I totally understood that. But it was bizarre and odd to me that Vince Russo and Vince McMahon went down the stunning road, excuse me, but when him giving me Stunners week after week, it was very shocking to me that we went down that road again. It just was.
I got to ask, there were times where he was sort of hokey pokey, he being Austin pronouns pal. He was hokey pokey with working with the WWE. Did you ever have a conversation with him about what if trying to get him to TNA?
Never.
What is your relationship like now with Steve, if there is any?
Well, I did his podcast, and that was something that I was hoping that we could bring up, because that was in the it was right after I left TNA. And I had announced Global Force, but we hadn't really looked, to my best recollection. We had just sort of gotten things going, and he reached out to me for me to do his podcast, which, okay, that's cool. Yeah. And I was excited to do it. So did the podcast. He went on and did it separate ways. And then when I go back, Hall of Fame and going on through that, I don't want to say we were buds or chummy or nothing like that, but very professional, very cordial. And it was what it was. And then the last time I saw Steve was the Legends sellout in Tampa, Florida. And what a day that was, in my role of, however you want to say it, creative / producer / whatever, but a lot of legends, and you had to get clearances and all that. But I was pretty much power walking down a hall to get where I was going. And Steve came around the corner, and we literally passed each other with not even a heartbeat, like, oh, and then I turned around. I'm like, Steve, Jeff, hey, man. And he looked at me, he said, well, son of a gun, how long you been back here? And, at that time, whatever it'd been, a couple of months, he's like, damn, dude, good for you. Shook hands, and we went on about our way.
Man. Oh, this was a fun, interesting episode. Let my family save your family some cash. You don't need perfect credit. You don't need money out of your pocket, but we will save you money. It's not a matter if, it's a matter of how much. SaveWithConrad.com. Got a ton of questions. Lenny wants to know, was Steve still pretty much the same guy in the USWA as he was in the WWF, or had success changed him, in your opinion?
You know what? Steve always had that game time mentality. He played football, an athlete, but like I said, he had that Texas swagger from the wrestling school, but him being an athlete and really wanting to learn the industry, and him and Tom Pritchard's relationship, and me and him working in Memphis. And as far as lots of things and moving parts and lots of t-shirt sales. And I've said it on 1,000 interviews, the single hottest, not talking longevity, I'm talking about rise to, I still believe, in that era, and I was doing all those house shows, live events, single hottest box office attraction this industry's ever produced. And he was the same then, beer drinking, hell raising dude, than he was coming out of wrestling school.
Let's hit a few more questions here, and then we'll wrap this one up. This is from Adam. He says, do you feel that your close friendship with Owen Hart might have contributed to Austin not wanting to work with you? The rumor and innuendo was Austin never forgave Owen for the neck incident.
At the time, I didn't even, again, I'm not only delusionally optimistic, sometimes I'm just delusional, naive. I had no idea. But in hindsight, knowing Steve and the check and the history, and Steve, obviously, so I'm told, but held on to resentment on Owen. I'm sure I got residual, just like I got residual from my old man. I'm sure I got residual Owen heat.
Oh man. Ben wants to know, Vince Russo said he used the NWA angle to show Jim Cornette that old school stories wouldn't work in 1998. Does Jeff agree that classic wrestling angles don't get over in modern wrestling like Russo says? Or do you think you can use 80 stories with young guys like Corny has said?
It's like trying to play a basketball game nowadays without a 3-point line or a shot clock, or produce a television show like you did All in the Family or Andy Griffith. Things are done differently. So the foundation, the building blocks, you got to build a foundation, then you got to frame it, then you got to drywall it, you got to paint it, all those things you got to do, but just things are done differently. You cannot go back in time, period. You can't. And if you do what you think worked in the 80s, 90s, or 2000s and do it today, you're going to fail. You have to, in my opinion, you have to evolve with the times.
Phil wants to know, and we'll put a bow on this episode, should someone have so much say over their character they can refuse to work with someone? In the regular world, that gets you fired.
This ain't the regular world, pal.
No, it's not.
In sports entertainment, it's, and look, how many great songwriters get to pick who their songs go to, and how many singers say, nope, I want this song, this song, this song. Or movies, you know, Tom Cruise or Pacino or any famous actor, they get to pick and choose who they work with, who's on set, who's not on set. It's just how the world goes around. So in the entertainment world, not just professional wrestling, LeBron makes his team around him. Michael Jordan, basketball player in sport, they built the team around. So the more clout, the more leverage you have, absolutely, it goes with it. It goes with it. So I don't harbor any resentment over Steve's business decisions throughout his entire career, because he had the clout to say it. What I do regret is me not, look, you learned everything. Me not, well, you can't, what I know now, I would, wish I knew back then, but that's water under the bridge. But just if there is a talking point or a walking point from today, it's all about communication. Had I communicated on the check situation, him on the promo at Raw, him on the situation with Deborah, him on the stunning things like, hey, Steve, I know you don't want to work with me. Is there anything we can do? Just go up and have the conversation. I never said a word. I just was a soldier and said, okay, you don't want to work with me. Let's move on down the road. I didn't communicate enough.
I love that in recovery, Jeff has learned to just say, you know what? I can't control what everybody else can do. I can only control what I can do. And I could have handled that better. It leads to a level of self-awareness that we don't often hear in wrestling podcasts. So I appreciate you being open and honest and transparent with us about it.
I mean, I really screwed up, and it ain't my business whether somebody else may or may not have, but it's the truth. And God almighty, if there's one person listen to this, and I'm talking family members, business, across the board, it's amazing what open lines of communication will do in your life.
Don't walk around with hurt feelings. Talk through it.
That's right.
Hey, if you're a fan of my podcast or wrestling nostalgia in general, or maybe you're looking to connect with other wrestling fans like yourself, adfreeshows.com is the place for you. You get all 7 podcasts early, ad-free, and on video for as little as $9 a month. That's like 30 cents an episode. And if you're looking for even more, we've got tons of exclusive bonus content, as well as live experiences with your favorite stars of the past and the present that you just can't get anywhere else. Ad-free Shows is the community if you're a wrestling fan. So sign up with us today at adfreeshows.com. And of course, next week, we've got My World talking Bound for Glory 06. It's a monumental step in TNA's history. It's the first pay-per-view held outside of the fairgrounds, outside of the Impact Zone, outside of Huntsville. And we've got you in the main event against Sting for the NWA World title, and Sting's career is on the line. Oh, by the way, it's also Kurt Angle's pay-per-view debut for TNA, as he's the special guest enforcer for the match. We'll also see the 6 sides of steel between LAX and AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels, along with Samoa Joe, Abyss, Brother Runt, and Raven in a Monsters Ball match. And Jake Roberts is the referee. Plus the Kevin Nash Open Invitational X Division Gauntlet. Kevin Nash on the X Division was just great stuff. Also coming up in October, we're going to have Jeff on a live Zoom for our top guys and My Push members. That's happening on the calendar this month as well. So if you're listening to our show right now, you need to hurry over to adfreeshows.com. By the way, if you're listening as this drops on the 19th, that Zoom with Jeff is tonight. By the way, the easiest way to introduce a new listener, a wrestling fan to our show is our YouTube. It's My World on YouTube.com. And if you've got a question for Jeff and I about the show here or about next week's topic, you can ask it on Twitter at MyWorldPod on Twitter. And Jeff, as Tommy Rich used to say, somebody say something about fired up. This was a good episode today, wasn't it?
Well, Conrad, I apologize for going long.
No, it's okay. All good.
Irritable, but I wanted to set the record straight. But no. So shout out to the researchers. Start now on next week's. I'm kidding.
Hey, I don't know that you saw, but check your email.
Okay.
He won't be doing any research for you anymore. We got a new team member on the program that's happened in the background while you were ranting and raving today.
Oh, so now I'm ranting and raving. You know, just the whole vibe of it. We got into this episode, and I know Conrad, and look, this is the selfish talent side of me. You've got at a minimum 6 other podcasts on your plate, and ad-free, First Family, and everything that goes with it. But I really, and I mean this, there's some, look, next week is the highest, biggest buy rate. I want every episode. I really, really do. I come with my A game, and I want it to be the very best. If somebody's going to invest, and this is what I told Karen on vacation, we were sitting on the beach under the deal, and she's like, are you on your phone again? And I go, look, we're out here just chilling, but I'm not just surfing. I'm on Twitter, and I'm sort of looking at some feeds and come back. I really, if somebody's going to invest 2 to 3 hours to listen to Jeff Jarrett and Conrad Thompson talk on a podcast, the very least I can do, the very least, is step up to the plate and give it everything I got. And I maybe unrealistically expect everybody else on the team to do that as well. I'll just say that.
No, I don't disagree. I think today the lesson, everything's a teachable moment, right? And so you and I are evolved human beings. We think that way. We look forward to a loss. I mean, it means we're going to learn something and we're going to get better. And maybe we didn't communicate clearly about the direction I wanted to take today's show, which to me was all about, man, I wasn't happy with I wasn't happy about my payoff and that check and then the promo, because I don't think if you remove the check conversation, if you totally remove that back slap and look at it all you want, it ain't going to get no bigger. You take that out of the equation. I don't know that Stone Cold steps to you as soon as you come through that curtain and reads you the right act. I don't think it happens.
So I could not agree more, but the story behind the story, the reason I thought I could say that to him is because my old man picked him to come to Tennessee out of all the talent in Texas at the time. Remember, Mick Foley was in Tennessee first. There's a whole, there's a bunch of guys that were in Tennessee first. The first guy to come our way, Mark and Steve. I literally thought I had maybe the liberty of saying, hey, Steve, I literally thought that as a 21-year-old kid. So that's where I think the whole context of, I was under the assumption that me and Steve were much bigger friends and buddies than we were. So I hear you.
I don't disagree, which is why we told the story of, hey, when do you think I could get booked full time? And he said, hell, I think you're ready now. And you guys were off to the races, and you did wrestle all over the place. You had events in Dallas. You had events at the Mid-South Coliseum. You were making towns, and you guys had a bunch of matches together in like 1991. I guess a couple in 1990 that I can see as well. Mm-hmm. Either way, it was fun today to talk about the, how we got where we were with this whole situation. We hope that next week you'll take a listen to maybe the biggest buy rate TNA ever had, right? Bound for Glory 2006.
Most buys, not the highest grossing.
Most buys coming your way next week, right here on My World. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.